Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 5 of my podcast, They're Not Mine. This is a podcast series about life with kids through the eyes of an auntie, amongst other things. All right, let's do a quick previously on recap so everyone's up to speed of where the story's at. I have 3 siblings, 2 who have had children. Trina has had Annie and Bindi's had Ayla. We would soon learn that Annie was the organiser and Ayla, she was the disruptor. And me, Aunty Tan, I was now outnumbered. All right, let's get on with it. So Ayla was just over 1 year of age and she was still mastering the art of walking, particularly long distances and doing outdoor activities. Annie, she was at the peak of curiosity, just not quite 3 years of age and up for anything. So while Ayla was still trying to find her feet, it was Annie and I that were up for play dates and adventures. Well, that's not quite true. It was Annie, Aunty Tan, and Baby Doll. Baby Doll was this soft plush doll that went everywhere with Annie. She was about the size of maybe just short of a bread box, and she was pink and purple and white in colour and a permanent fixture in Annie's life. In fact, it was difficult at times to extract Baby Doll to get her in the washing machine for a quick wash every couple of weeks. It was always Annie in the car first, strapped into a car seat, Baby Doll straight in there with her. Baby Doll had this superpower to calm temper tantrums. She could soothe Annie at nap times and she was the perfect distraction during nappy or diaper changes. It was like she was a Tony Award-winning one-woman Broadway act. So one weekend I drove up the coast to grab Annie to spend the weekend with me in Surrey Hills. We had big plans. We were going to do shoes and clothes shopping. And yes, there was a mandatory visit to Centennial Park to visit the ducks and dodge those aggressive black swans. After a slow start on the Saturday morning in Centennial Park, man, you can't hurry a kid at this age, we were finally in the car and off to Westfield. Straight to the shoe store with very clear writing instructions from Annie. I only want pink and white Aunty Tan. Didn't matter what other shoes there were, what other colours, it had to be pink and white. And after about 35 minutes, we walked out the store with 2 pairs of new shoes under our arm. So now it was time for coffee for Aunty Tan and cupcake for Annie. I smiled when we sat down in the cafe. Annie reached for 2 napkins, serviettes. She placed one on her lap and placed one on Baby Doll's lap. And I smiled because I had taught her something. This was a little something that I had learnt when I attended June Daly Watkins Deportment School in the summer after finishing high school. I think I shared that a couple of episodes back. Despite the medication I had taken to stop my growing, I was still tall. I was 5'11", and Mum and Dad wanted me to do that deportment course to ensure that I knew how to carry myself well. Well, I guess it was that, or maybe they were a little concerned their firstborn was going to be some gangly giraffe that wouldn't know the difference between a salad fork and a dinner fork. In fact, I remember my mum telling stories, not only to me but to others, that when I was brand new, newborn, she introduced me to her parents, Noni and Pop, and Pop's comments when he first saw me was, well, if it was a dog, I wouldn't let you keep her. Look at the size of her feet. She'll be huge. I mean, even today, my mother still has a giggle in retelling that story to whoever wants to listen. So yes, at an early age, I had taught Annie how to set a table at home. In fact, when she stayed with me, she knew where the placemats were. She knew where to put the knife and the fork, or spoon in her case, and knew where to lay the napkins. I had to smile when she was putting these napkins in her and Baby Doll's laps. I loved her optimism that that single thin serviette was going to capture all the cake that she and Baby Doll were sharing. So after about 20 minutes, I said, all right, let's go clothes shopping. And she absolutely squealed with delight, cake circling in her mouth as she grabbed Baby Doll, grabbed my hand, and off to Target we went. We headed straight for the children's wear department, and I have to hand it to this kid. You know, we probably got in 35, 40 minutes, which was about enough. I knew I was on a time-sensitive mission while I was holding up dresses and tops and jeans and all sorts of things. So with decisions made, new clothes in hand, we paid and we headed straight back to the car. So as we reached the car and I'm putting the bags in the car, I looked down and I noticed something's missing. And I said to Annie, where's Baby Doll? And she just said, gone. I said, what do you mean gone? Where's Baby Doll? She just raised her hands and shrugged her shoulders as if she had no idea about the crisis that was about to take place. I grabbed her hand and we retraced our steps back to the children's wear department in Target. I crouched down and held her hands and looked her in the face and I said, "Help Aunty Tan find baby doll," in a fun, non-anxious voice. I felt an increase in panic as I was starting to look down the aisles looking for baby doll. Annie, she was just swinging them off the racks as if she didn't have a care in the world and didn't even know what baby doll was. Now, I got to tell you guys, this was actually baby doll number 3. You see, Annie had lost the previous 2 dolls, and unbeknownst to her, Brett and Trina over the last couple of years had done Swifties and swapped in the new dolls when she wasn't aware that the old one had been lost. And it was at this exact moment that I remembered when baby doll number 3 had been bought, and my sister's saying, "Phew, I'm glad we got it. I think it's the last doll in existence." And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I have lost baby doll. How am I going to tell Trina? Not only deal with the drama that's going to occur later, how am I going to tell my sister and her husband that I've lost baby doll? Come on, Annie, you've got to help me find. Let's keep looking for baby doll. I was searching through racks. I was looking under shelving. I was lifting up clothes. I was down on my hands and knees, feeling around underneath tables. And I thought, oh, do they clean the floor much? Now, there's a bit of a fact you need to know about me. I am a little bit of a germaphobe, not medically diagnosed, but I'm sure if my family are listening now, they'd be nodding knowingly. I am the sort of person that will lay on that toilet paper on a public toilet seat. And I can remember as a kid, if I needed a tissue and I would ask my mum if she had a spare tissue, and she'd reach into what seemed like the deep, dark depths of her handbag and she'd pull out a tissue that I knew at glance had been used before. It was absolutely gross. And now here I was in a department store, feeling around on my hands and knees and touching something that felt like a wet tissue of an absolute stranger. I can't tell you, I was so far out of my comfort zone, but I knew I had a bigger mission at play. I had to find baby doll. I knew I couldn't look for the doll and keep an eye on Annie. So I said to Annie, "I'm going to call your name loudly. And when you hear it, you say my name. I'll yell Annie and you say Aunty Tan." She giggled. She thought it was a great game. I said, "Practice, Annie." She went, "Aunty Tan," and thought it was fabulous. So I am starting to now move down aisles and into departments that I know we didn't walk near. And I'm yelling, "Annie," and I'd hear the Aunty Tan. "Annie," I'd hear the Aunty Tan. All's going well. I'm looking through merchandise on tables and I yell out again, "Annie." Nothing. "Annie, it's Aunty Tan." Absolutely nothing. "Annie, this is not a game. Say my name." I could feel the panic rising inside me and I started to feel sick at the thought of what could have happened to her. And I'm calling her name. I am scouring all the aisles, calling her name at the top of my voice. "Annie!" Other shoppers are starting to turn and look and really thinking, what the hell am I going to do? Forget losing the doll. I'm 0 for 2. I've lost the kid as well. How am I going to tell Trina and Brett I've lost their daughter? I was beside myself. And then eventually I turned towards the front of the store and there she was, right near the lolly section, aka candy. I raced over, I grabbed her, and I couldn't help but sit on the ground. I could feel the tears in my eyes, and I held her so tight. She just giggled. She just giggled. I was beside myself with adrenaline racing through my body, and I had to close my eyes and take a deep breath. And then I pulled back and I said to her, still trying to hold a fun voice, "Let's go and find baby doll." Back to the children's wear section for one last spin. Maybe no more than a minute. There was a rack heavily laden with kids' pajamas and I saw something white poking out underneath. I dived underneath and there was baby doll. It was like the holy grail with light, like ta-da! I grabbed it and I held it up high. "I found her, Annie. I've got baby doll." I'm holding her high like it's the Bledisloe Cup when Wallabies have beaten the All Blacks. Annie, she just casually walked over, took my hand, took baby doll, no sweat for the kid. Okay, so after the memorable days of the Westfield disappearance of Baby Doll, Annie and I certainly had some fun times, and we even actually had some fancy dates, which was a nice change from crawling around on the floor of a department store. So it was several months later, and I decided I wanted to take Annie for a haircut. Not just any kind of haircut, a haircut in a grown up salon, something really special and a little bit fancy. And I thought this could be an amazing tradition to start with Annie. And then, of course, she'd be a great advocate and tell Ayla about it. And then for whoever else came along. I'd recently become a client of this salon, and it was certainly somewhat stylish and sophisticated. And the owner had created this brightly coloured corner so the staff could do the haircuts of the children of the stylish and sophisticated. And I remember thinking, what a great place to bring Annie. So I made the appointment, and a few weeks later, we rocked up for our very special day. With Baby Doll underarm, into the salon we walked and sat and waited for our turn. Annie was taking it all in. She was so excited. She was watching what people were doing. She was watching the haircuts and people having their hair blow dried. There was the noise of the dryers, but it was generally quite quiet. And we started to talk in hushed tones. And she was saying things to me like, "Where does all the hair go, Aunty Tan?" And I'd explain where the hair would go. Or she'd assure me that the noise doesn't scare me, referring to the noise of the hairdryers. I think she was trying to assure me that she'd be fine once she was in the chair. I smiled, and she wasn't missing a beat. Her name was eventually called, and she was placed in this high chair, and the cutting apron was placed around her. Now, the stylist we had was actually the owner, and he was a fabulous guy, and he was delightful with Annie. He made her feel special, and she was like a princess sitting on a throne. Now, Annie has got tight curls, and obviously when it gets shorter, they get tighter. Imagine somewhat Shirley Temple-esque with the Australian accent. She was loving it. She's sitting in the chair, and she's got this bright big smile, and teeth are showing, and she's taking it all in. Now, this wasn't any kind of special haircut in the regards that it didn't need a special wash. So he started to spray her hair wet and started to comb once her hair was wet and was combing it through. And I'm sitting beside Annie in the chair and looking up at him and smiling at Annie and saying, "Isn't this fun?" And she's getting more and more excited. And I started to watch him, and he'd comb and pause. And then he'd comb again and look at the top of her head and pause. And then he combed again. And then he started to look at his comb. And then eventually he motioned for me to come up. I'm thinking, this is a bit strange. I wonder what's going on. So I walked up round behind the chair with him, and he said to me, "Has your niece been to the beach?" I thought, what a strange question. I said, "Well, no. Why?" And he combed again, and he looked at the comb. And he said to me, "Either this is sand or your niece has head lice." I was mortified. I thought, head lice? In my head, I'm thinking, please let it be sand. Please let it be sand. It's got to be sand. And I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, yes. And he's combing and looking. And I'm trying to look back at Annie, and I'm smiling, saying, "Isn't this exciting?" And she's really excited and still taking in all the energy, and the staff are walking past and paying her lovely compliments. And I turned to him quietly and I said, "Are you going to be able to cut her hair?" To which he said, "No, for hygiene reasons. It's against regulations. I can't cut her hair if she's got active head lice." And we were speaking in really hushed tones. And my heart started to break in a million pieces. Here was this kid, so excited to have a haircut. And I thought, how am I now going to just take the apron off her, get her down and walk her out and explain why she couldn't have a haircut? Look, to his credit, he kept looking and combing. And at this stage, I think Annie was starting to sense something wasn't going right. And she's looking at me, smiling, kind of her eyes pleading. And I'm saying, "It's great, darling. We're just going to keep combing your hair." And then I started to feel the pitiful glances from some of the other patrons in the salon. And I have to say, this mother wolf in me just grew. and I wanted to scream at them. My niece isn't dirty. I'm sure the stylish and sophisticated kids of yours have had knits as well. Of course, I didn't yell it out. I felt so protective of her. So I turned to the stylist one last time and I said, what can we do? And he said, look, I can't see any live ones. So I'll cut her hair and then I'll just have to absolutely sterilise everything. And in my head, I'm going, live ones? Now, this wasn't some kind of $15 for haircut kind of a place. Why the hell didn't I go to the local barber? I couldn't believe this was happening. Anyway, to his credit, he cut her hair. He made her feel so special as he turned her in the chair while he's cutting, and then he pulled the hairdryer out and blew her hair dry. She felt fabulous. She's putting her hands up to the curls. She absolutely loved it. I couldn't have thanked him enough. It could have been the most disastrous, heartbreaking day, and he was so gentle and so kind. And as we paid and walked out of the salon, I kept saying, you look beautiful, your hair looks gorgeous, don't you just love it, don't you just love it? And she's putting her hands to her curls, and I glanced at the other patrons and I thought, nobody is going to destroy my niece's day. So we got in the car with baby doll and Annie fully strapped in. I turned around before I started to move with the car and I said to her, now, I have to say, when a girl gets her hair done, she cannot possibly just go straight home. She has to go out and do something special. So we're going to go and have a treat. She squealed, yay, Aunty Tan. So we drove to a cafe, quick coffee and cake, and we're on our way home. The entire time, Annie's in her car seat, leaning, trying to look at herself in the revision mirror and continue to play with the curls. It was funny, later that night, we were sitting on the couch. She was in her pajamas and we were watching TV. And she was just kind of tucked in the crook of my arm while we were sitting there. And I couldn't help myself. I looked down and I started to just touch her head. And I thought, was that something? No. And she squirmed. And then I left it for a minute or two and I looked down again and I started to just move her hair and she squirmed again. So I thought, no, just let it go, Tanya, let it go. The third time I looked down on her head and with that she put both hands to her head and she went, no knits, Aunty Tan, no knits. She knew all along. The following afternoon I drove Annie home and on my way back to Sydney later that night, my head started to itch. I was convinced I had head lice. I stopped, I bought treatment. Psychosomatic? Probably. Did I have head lice? Probably not. Look, I started a lot of traditions with the kids, but I decided haircut in an upmarket salon wasn't going to be one of them. One of the traditions I started was an annual holiday with Aunty Tan and cousins. But that story's for another time. I'm Aunty Tan, and I really hope you join me for episode 6 of They're Not Mine.